Sweet. Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Nice to see you, my beautiful viewers and fellow fans of the Vedas. This is the next book we're going to get into. It's the Divine Forces of the Lunar Nakshatras, as portrayed in the Vedas. This is a book that is preceded by a author who, as I understand, they seem to be an author who uses sidereal rashis. Now, this is why the thing is that, again, myself as an interpreter of things related to the nakshatras, I know that there's so much information here that we're going to read, and this author is very this is going to be a long go here. Last time we did one of these nakshatra readings, it was a 3-hour video. I expect this to go at least 2.5 to 3 hours. Not this section, but the total video, because there's a lot of information here. And what we have to do as modern interpreters of these things is we have to remember that we kind of have to discern the wheat from the chaff here. We got to bring the cream out of the runny milk. There's going to be possibly runny milk here, and I'm going to try to say when I think that this is some information will be coming from the distortions given, the two distortions that we've already mentioned. That would be essentially that there are incorrect zodiacal associations with the nakshatra. For example, Rohini was anciently considered to be in Taurus, like I said. And in this sidereal understanding, they blend the sign with the nakshatra, and we have to discern from that. You know, a lot of people say part of the nurturing juiciness of Rohini comes from the fact that it's in Taurus. But now, Rohini falls into tropical Gemini, which means it's still the progenitor, it still has a lot of these connotations of Rohini being the second from Kritika, and it's a feminine nakshatra. It is the arouser. Those are all still there. We have to discern the arousal and abundance of Prajapati and Apaha and Oshodayo, all these things that are inherently relate with the nakshatra. We have to separate that from any associations with Taurus, because the nakshatra no longer falls into tropical Taurus. That's what we have to discern when we read this book, because this is an author that practices sidereal rashis. Doesn't mean that this isn't still useful information, because thankfully this is an author who notes their sources, shows which parts of the Vedas. Mainly we're going to be talking about Prajapati. What is Prajapati, and what is his role in the Vedas? And it's going to, thankfully the author notes her sources very well. Just goes to show the importance of noting your sources in these kinds of things. Now, to give a little bit of a backdrop to Rohini, it's interesting to note most of these nakshatras are going to be conveyed by either they're going to be the Adityas, the Rudras, or the Vasus. That's where most of these guys are. And each one of these almost has their own sorts of correlations in a way. Now, Prajapati, Brihaspati, and the Pitris, these are the nakshatras, as well as what's called the Vishva Devas, which is the totality of the divine forces. These 4 nakshatras are all kind of their own thing, and there's information regarding them that can be said in their own way. Really, all of the other nakshatras sort of have their own thing going on in this way. They all have classes, energies, aims, elements, and castes, etc. Now, it's just important to note that Prajapati is one of the four that stands out and is not considered in one of these other three main groupings. So let's sort of start to dig into what exactly that means for Prajapati. So this is chapter 5 of our book. What we read is that the author is going to give us another little supplication, and this comes from the Rig Veda itself. The Rig Veda being the most ancient of the mandalas of the Vedas. What we read is, O Lord of people, Prajapati, there is none other than you who has given existence to all of these beings. May our aspirations for which we dedicate ourselves to you be ours. May we be the possessors of grand riches. That's a lot of the stuff that you'll hear in the Vedas. Supplications and desires and descriptions of desires of wanting to have abundance and to experience abundance. Now, we are going to dig into cosmogony and the scriptures. This is the chapter that we're going into here. Radha, the author, tells us that noteworthy are the Rig Vedic suktas that elucidate the genesis and nature of the universe. Although various cosmological nuances are sprinkled throughout the 10 mandalas of the Vedas, the most significant suktas are found in Mandala 10 of the Rig Veda. These offer seemingly divergent cognitions on the origin of the phenomenal world. This is the world that we know, the physical world, the planet Earth, mankind, all the animals, etc. And this is as it was mystically envisioned by the Rig Vedic seers. Curiously, even these seers pondered at times, who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? Where does it come from? The gods came afterwards with the creation of this universe. Who then knows whence and wherefore it has arisen? It comes from the Rig Veda, Mandala 10, chapter 129, verse 6. The seer's revelations on the origin of the universe are significant on several fronts. First and foremost, they cast light upon the most important event in the antiquity of the universe, which is the dawning of the manifest world. They divulge the birth of the gods and the creation of all animate and inanimate objects. Secondly, buried within these suktas are the vital seeds that give life to the epic legends of later times. These include Prajapati's desire for his own daughter and the subsequent birth of Rudra. And Rudra is the character of Shiva. We're going to see the character of Rudra in later episodes of this Nakshatra series. Now, what we hear is, to continue this statement, one of the seeds of the epic of later legends in the Vedas, one of them is the Prajapati's desire for his own daughter. That's Brahma's desire for his own daughter, as well as the subsequent birth of Rudra. That's the Samudramatana. It's the churning of the ocean, in which the desires of the gods are satiated. And that's a very important chapter in Vedic cosmology. It's the churning of the ocean through Rahu and Ketu. So we also, in the story of the creation of the universe, we also hear of something called Dakshaya Gyabata. and that's Daksha's great sacrificial yajna. It has to do with Shiva being the husband of Sati, and etc. As well, we read about the seeds of the Brahma Darshana, the casting of Brahma's spilt seed into the sacrificial fire, and many others. So what this whole phrase has gone to say is that the story of the progeneration of the universe has seeds of Vedic understanding, which later in the Puranas and in all the other texts of the Vedas, the later stage Vedas, they get their mythology and inspiration from. Now, I just want to write something down real quick to remind myself of later. So, lastly, the cosmogony hymns illuminate the dharma of many nakshatra devatas, for here their original purpose for birth is divulged. So the dharma of many of the devas that we're going to read about in this nakshatra series is kind of given in these progeneration myths, in the procreation of the world. Now, despite the murkiness of the cosmology suktas, a consistent theme shines forth. Prajapati, the lord of creatures, is the creator of the universe. At times, Prajapati is referred to as Daksha Prajapati. Daksha Prajapati and Aditi parent the Adityas. That's the sun gods, the gods of the divisions of the day and of the year and of time. And the Adityas are, of course, a huge chunk of many of the nakshatras that are given in the Vedas. And that comes from Rig Veda Mandala 10. Now, elsewhere, the creator is birthed from a golden egg, Hiranyagarbha, formed within the cosmic waters and called Ka Prajapati. It's a golden embryo of sorts that's talked about in the Rig Veda, Mandala 10. Now, as time progresses, a rather complex web weaves together Vedic cosmology with those accounts found in the Puranas and Itihasas. These are called the epics. Puranic Brahma, a name absent in the Rig Veda. So the Rig Veda doesn't actually say Brahma, but the Puranas use the name Brahma. But in the actual Rig Veda, the character who comes closest to the attributes and functions of Brahma is the Rig Vedic character of Prajapati. Brahma takes on the role of creation earlier performed by Prajapati, and, along with Vishnu and Shiva, is a member of the Hindu Trinity, Brahma. So we're really talking about Brahma here. It's the procreative progenitor known as Prajapati. So, next, in coming into chapter 2, what we read is, out of desire, man is born. So oddly enough, only one hymn in the Rig Veda addresses the pre-creative state of the universe. Here, the Rishi mystically refers to Tadikam, that one, who permeates the entire universe, nay, is the universe. There was neither death nor immortality then, and this is a quote from the Rig Veda. This is the pre-creative state of the universe that we're talking about, and the Rishi refers to Tadikam. At that time, there was neither death nor immortality. There was no distinguishing sign of night nor of day. That one, Tadikam, breathed, windless, by its own impulse. Other than that one, there was nothing beyond. Poets, seeking in their heart with wisdom, found the bond of existence in non-existence. There were seed placers, and there were powers. There was impulse beneath. There was giving forth above. It's interesting that we almost could see this as the Taittiriya Brahmana Sutra. There was impulse herbs beneath, and there was giving forth water above. Goes to show you how deeply Rohini resonates with this impulse of creation from the very beginning, the beginningless beginning of this universe. Now, stunningly, the Rishi reveals that the universe has been alive and breathing since eternity. There's never been nothing, but there has been a state of nothingness, which is something. That one breathed, windless, by its own impulse. Within that one lay dormant seed powers, mystically envisioning the transcendental nature of the universe. The rishis grasped the bond between the pre-creative state of the universe and all things manifest, that all-pervading cosmic being known as Brahman. It's as if really, just like we say with Om, there is a state of transcendental beingness that happens before Om. Om is everything. You'll see that the word Om takes the full spectrum of the mouth to speak. A, U, M. M meaning Maya, the U meaning Tat, and then the A meaning Sat. Sat, Tat, and then Maya. That's what Om represents. It is the full spectrum. A at the 6th chakra, U at the heart and the solar plexus, and then M at the lower chakras. And there's always implied, while you're doing Om, 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 there's an inherent Om that is Om. It's transcendental and occurring the whole way through. This is just like existence. The existence of nothingness implies the existence of somethingness. The existence of somethingness is already contained in the seed of the nothingness that was there before. So in cosmology, we see that it's almost like there was a Big Bang, but the Big Bang occurred in a vacuum of continuity that has never ended, and that is Brahman. So it's wonderful cosmological stuff that we're talking about here. And you can watch, I'm going to be making a video called The East versus Western Idea of the Cosmos. And I'm going to kind of go into that a little bit more through my own reckoning. I just want to write one more thing down. So let's continue on here. It's amazing to just hear these cool progenerative stories coming from the Vedas. That's one of the reasons I love this book. Now, this pre-creative state prior to the Big Bang is described as pure darkness enveloped in water. Kind of reminds you of Genesis in the Bible when you think about it. Darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning. There was no distinguishing sign. All this was water. That life force that was covered with emptiness arose through the power of heat, tapas, Agni. That's why Agni in Kritika, Agni is the Deva of Kritika, and Kritika comes first, which is interesting. It's almost like the heat rose through the water, and the heat is this force that was almost there before the water. That's why Agni is the great god, even before Prajapati as the active progenitor. who's acting on and through the heat of Agni. And it's amazing to me how much this resonates with what's given in the biblical Genesis. Now, what follows here is the depiction of creation portrayed in several cosmogony hymns of the Rig Veda. The precise sequencing of the manifestation is vague in most hymns, perhaps suggesting simultaneous or parallel events. Deep within the stillness of the infinite waters, divine kama, desire, stirs, providing the impetus for creation. Desire came upon that one in the beginning. That was the first seed of mind. It's Rig Veda, Mandala 10, chapter 129, verse 4. Mystically visioning the same cosmic stirring, another rishi adds vivid details. This is also coming from the Rig Veda, Mandala 10. He is the benefactor of man. His virile energy develops, but he, the valorous, preserves the virility and draws it back. Again, the irresistible vital divine power concentrates the energy, which he communicates to his maiden daughter. You have to understand that when creation is creating creation, there has to be some incestuous resonance here, which it's a weird thing for us to talk about as manifest humans who would not be interested in anything incestuous in this way. But creation, again, the nothingness out of which somethingness comes is a part of that nothingness. So creation has to make love to itself in some way. So the potential of creation is making love to, it's kind of giving its seed to manifest creation. And that's Brahma jumping on his own daughter. It's funny how these Vedic hymns and myths can kind of go. So what we read is that in that split moment of cosmic impulse, the Creator pours forth Shrij, the germ of life, impregnating his own daughter. Now, there's a commentator who gives a comment on the use of the term Shrij, is what really how you'd say it, Shrij. As is well known, the usual verb to denote Prajapati's creative acts is, in the Brahmana, Shrij, which in the forms of the medium literally means to emit from oneself. Prajapati emitted or brought into existence the creatures, the offspring, the living beings. And the actual sutra reads, Prajapatiha Praja Ashrajata. He created Agni, the fire. He created cattle. He created the deities. The process is viewed obviously as an exteriorization or obtainment of the independent existence of beings and objects that hitherto were or might be supposed to be within the Creator, to form part of the totality that was his being or person. So thus, Prajapati has stated to have emitted from himself sacrificial worship. That's yajna, which is the crux of the Vedas, if you understand it. That was a footnote. So now we're going to kind of dig more into what we're reading here. In that split moment of cosmic impulse, the Creator pours forth Shrij, the germ of life, and impregnates his own daughter. As Prajapati emits his vital seed, a portion spills to earth, giving birth to Agni, the fire divine. It's interesting that, again, the seed of the story is contained in the potential that comes through. Agni, as a principle, existed before Prajapati gave birth to it. The potential existed, and then Prajapati was the progenitive manifester of it. In that first nanosecond of creation, all the gods are born. We hear that in Rig Veda, Mandala 10, chapter 72, verse 5. As for the particulars of how Prajapati came to have a daughter in the first place, Scripture alludes to an apparent act of mutual creation. We read that from Aditi, Daksha Prajapati was born, and from Daksha Prajapati, Aditi was born. For Aditi was born as your daughter, O Prajapati, and after her were born the blessed gods, the kinsmen of immortality. So amazingly, Aditi is acclaimed to be Daksha's mother, wife, and daughter. As the daughter of the universal creative force, she is often called Usas, which means the dawn. Weird and psychedelic. How else would it go, you know? So we recall in the previous hymn that Prajapati impregnates his daughter. Since Scripture considers Aditi to be Prajapati's daughter, congruence exists between these two cosmogony suktas. It's Rig Veda, Mandala 10, verse 61, and verse 72. According to Vedic theology, Ushas, the dawn, represents the manifest powers of Aditi, the infinite or boundless one, and hence she is impregnated by her father in order to commence creation. This highly symbolic act is depicted as an act of incest in the later Vedas and Puranas, although no such moral assessment is made in the Rig Veda. Right. So later on, the Vedas and Puranas talk about this as having been a weird, incestuous thing. But in the Rig Veda, it's like alchemy. It's like two chemicals creating different chemicals. They're similar chemical constituents. You know, it's like, it's not given this moral compass when they talk about it in the Rig Vedas, which is interesting, just the reality. You know, it's almost like any human is spirit making love to spirit, and we could call that incestuous, but it's not when you think about it at the proper objective level of ultimate reality. So this is kind of how we deal with these things in talking about cosmogony myths. So Daksha is the other name for Prajapati, and they're kind of interchangeable in the Vedas. We read that Daksha, or Prajapati, and Aditi give birth to the Adityas. It's the sun gods. Their last-born child is Martanda, which is the mortal embryo, a sun that they place in the sky for the life and death of mortal beings. Martanda, which is interesting that our word mortal is connected to Martanda. Martanda marries Saranyu. It's the spring of water or cloud. And together, they give birth to the first mortals, Yama, through the nakshatra Bharani, and Yama's twin sister, Yami. Thus begins the cycle of mortality for mankind, birth, death, and resurrection. Manu Vaivasvata. So Manu Vaivasvata, which is Manu of the current Manvatara, is also their son. What this goes to say is that everything we've talked about, even the Adityas, are universal principles that will occur on any planet which procreates life and human life. Even the last son of the Adityas is Martanda, which is this mortal embryo. His giving birth to Yama and Yami are still things that are in the nakshatras that are universally always going to happen on any planet that bears life. Now, when they gave birth to the one called Manu, Vaivashvata, that was when it's our specific Earth that we're talking about. Manu Vaivashvata was the first dude, the first person, the first being of a human sort born on planet Earth specifically. So these co-creators, Daksha Prajapati and Aditi, by the way, is the presiding deity of Punarvasu Nakshatra. So these co-creators, Daksha Prajapati and Aditi, they share many common faculties, including the ability to sustain life on Earth. As universal grandparents of the first man and woman, they are frequently eulogized for procreation, particularly by the newlywed couple. Indeed, the householder who desires progeny is instructed to perform shraddha, the offering of gifts to the ancestors, when the full moon is in Rohini. And that kind of comes from the Puranas. Right. So when we have a newlywed couple in India, there will be some kind of eulogy, some kind of praise given to Prajapati and Aditi. Very cool. Now, evidenced by his ability to lay the power of reproduction into his own self for the purpose of creation, Prajapati's most stellar attribute is daksha, i.e., skillful adaptation. So there's a dexterity and an expertness that is described here. There is also a condition of having a capacity for deliberation and decision-making, the ability to act decisively, as well as poetic inspiration, and all wrapped up in the character of Daksha Prajapati, which will resonate at some level with Rohini as well. Deliberation, decision-making, poetic inspiration, and skillful adaptation. Now, as creator of the entire phenomenal world, Prajapati receives the epithet Vishvakarman, the all-creator. Prajapati, after having produced the creatures, became also Vishvakarman. And that comes from what we read. I should have my finger on this just so I don't have to keep going back. That comes from the Aitareya Brahmana. The Aitareya Brahmana is one of the commentaries on the Vedas. Now, elsewhere, we also read that the Lord of Creatures, the all-worker, Vishvakarman, Prajapati, is indeed this all-worker, for he has wrought all of this universe. That comes from the Satapatha Brahmana. Finally, Prajapati ruled Rohini, is gifted with the power of prosperity and material opulence, bhuti. He says, existence, bhu. So this is, Prajapati is the one who says bhu, existence, and as well as opulence. Verily, Prajapati is the one who has come into real existence, bhuta. Consequently, he, the sacrificer, obtains prosperity, bhutim. And that actually comes from the Taittiriya Brahmana as well. This gives us some idea of Rohini as this enjoyer of opulence and creation that it creates. So now the saga continues. In the Aitareya Brahmana, the story of Prajapati's creation of living creatures is greatly embellished. Realizing her father's lustful attraction, Ushas, the dawn, a deity, transforms into a doe and escapes Prajapati's embrace by leaping into the sky. Intent on conquest, Prajapati transforms into a buck. Bearing witness to such a horrific act, the gods cry, Prajapati commits an act never done before. This Aitreya Brahmana legend becomes the basis for Prajapati's sacrificial wish to reunite with Rohini. Prajapati emitted from himself many creatures, and then, having been emitted from him, they went away. Among them he longed for Rohini. He desired, may she come back to me, may I unite with her. He offered that well-known sacrificial pap to Prajapati, i.e. to himself, and to Rohini, who is his nakshatra. Consequently, she came back to him, and he united with her. What is dear to one, that comes back to him, and with what is dear to him, he unites, he who offers that oblation and who thus knows it. So Prajapati wants to experience the creation that he creates, is what this is saying. And this says something about Rohini, wanting to enjoy the creations that it is a part of. Which is an interesting thing, because a lot of the times when we create something, if it's good for the world, whatever it is, we want to leave that thing to be its own individual, you know? Just like a father wants to be close to his daughter, but can't have her all the time because she's become her own woman and individualizes and goes and gets her own lovers. Now, bearing back to what we're talking about in this, we see that this is a moment where Prajapati turns into a buck and jumps at his created daughter, his created manifestation. So, this is just, it shows you the absolute principle of procreation that Prajapati is. Now, desperate to prevent cohabitation between father and daughter, the gods fashion from their most terrifying forms the deity Bhutavan. It's a ghostly or ghastly, which is an appellation for Rudra. So horrific is Rudra's form that the Hotri, the priest who invokes the gods and recites the Rig Veda at sacrifice, is instructed to use the word Rudriya, which is Rudra's mastery, instead of Rudra, for diminishing the terror and danger arising from the pronunciation of the real name Rudra. Essentially what this is saying is that the yajna contains all the essence of the whole story of the Vedas. The sacrificial yajna, as we talked about in our Agni video, the yajna, the sacrifice, there's a sacrifice that the ancient Vedic people used to do. Sometimes it was with animals, most times it was with ghee. A lot of the times this yajna ceremony is done to bring goodness. It's done when critical things are happening like war or possibly even marriage. The yajna contains the essence of all the Vedas. And during this part of the Veda, Rudra's form is given such a frightfulness that the priest is instructed to use the word Rudriya, which is the majesty of what Rudra is supposed to be doing. It shows this psychedelic picture of the outcast nature of Shiva and Rudra as being something that the Vedic mind accepts as an important part of the pantheon. So when the procreator, which is the self in a way, goes to get and cohabitate with its own created daughter, the gods create something called Bhutavan, which is Rudra, Shiva, advising Bhutavan of the grave circumstance at hand. The gods demand that he pierce Prajapati with his arrow. Bhutavan, Rudra, Shiva, agrees, but first insists on a boon, that he be awarded sovereignty over all wild animals. Therefore, Bhutavan, Rudra, Shiva, receives the epithet Pashupati, the lord of beasts. And this is why Shiva has that appellation. There's the beasts inside of us, the animals, the passionate nature, which in a lot of ways relates to Rohini. It goes to show that Shiva, the self-incontinence, the disciplinary aspect of what Shiva conveys, the individuation, seeing yourself as separate from the beasts inside of yourself. Rudra is the key. Shiva is kind of the key to putting Rohini's arousal to its best effect. It's the, not necessarily discipline, but individuated grip on the spirit, the transcendental spirit beyond creation. That way you can play in creation objectively without letting your passions get away with you. So, pierced by Rudra's arrow, Prajapati sprang up and became a constellation, Mrigashirsha. They call him Mriga, i.e. the deer, and him, Rudra, the ruler of Ardra Nakshatra, who killed that being, which sprang from Prajapati's misdeeds, Mriga Vyadha, i.e. the hunter of deer. And this is useful when we look into the next nakshatras. Mrigashirsha being the deer, and Ardra being the hunter of deer. Hunter of the deer. The female deer, Rohit, red, into which Prajapati's daughter had been transformed, became the constellation Rohini. So the female deer is Rohini. Mrigashirsha is the buck, the male deer, from what I think I'm reading. I should be careful to make sure that I'm on the right track here. One thing we do read is that Aldebaran, the bright red star in the sky, is Rohini's Yogatara star. Right. I knew that there was a star related with Rohini that was red, and that would be Aldebaran. So it looks like the female deer, Rohit, became Rohini. Now, as for Mrigashirsha, it's interesting that this is saying that Prajapati became Mrigashirsha. But in any case, this is what's given in the Aitareya Brahmana. Now, the arrow by which the phantom of Prajapati's sin was pierced, which had 3 parts, became such an arrow in the sky. And this arrow in the sky potentially refers to the stellar constellation of Pushya. According to the Surya Siddhanta, the asterism Pushya is figured as a crescent and as an arrow. With the inclusion of the nebulous cluster Prasape of Pushya, the feathering of the arrow's shaft is formed. Interesting. So it goes to show you that there's a lot of stellar, starry depictions in the Surya Siddhanta, which is very interesting. Shravana is saying thank you for what we're doing here, and I appreciate you, Shravana. Now, H has asked, what is a Yogatara? The Yogatara is, each one of the nakshatras tends to have a star. I believe a Tara just generally means like a star. I don't know for sure, but I believe that's the case. So the Yogatara is essentially a star that is represented as the essential beingness, the essential energy of each nakshatra. Viktakara talks about this in his channel, where you can see that the Yogataras, the stars along the ecliptic, which relate to the nakshatras, some of them are higher, some of them are lower, and they move. Even though stars are really mostly fixed, they actually do move. The light from the stars moves over long periods of time. So the Yogatara and its placement in the sky does say something about the nature of the nakshatra. Again, Vic Dakar has got a great video describing that. So, we also read that the Jyotisha Siddhartha Sara, another text on Jyotisha, cites the arrow as the stellar pattern of Pushya and proclaims the bow as the stellar configuration of Punarvasu. So hence, Rudra's bow and the arrow by which Prajapati is pierced is conceivably the stellar configuration of sequential nakshatras, Punarvasu and Pushya. And Punarvasu and Pushya immediately follow Rohini, Mrigashiras, and Ardra, nakshatras implicated in the above legend. So all of this gives us a very interesting picture of this, and I wish I had the stars. I wish I had a picture of this. I didn't prepare. I didn't realize that this would bring this up in this way. I wonder if we could just do ourselves a quick favor and just poke around with it. Rohini, Mrigashirsha, Ardra, Pushya. It'd be nice if we could get an actual picture of these stars. But it doesn't really look like it. Magha, Chitra, Shlesha. Almost, but not quite. So in any case, it would be nice if we had a picture of the actual stars that we're talking about here, but we do not. But the idea being given here is that Rohini is Aditi, Mrigashirsha is the aspect of Prajapati, Ardra is Rudra, whose arrow pierces Mrigashirsha. And what we see is that Pushya is like Punarvasu is like the bow, and then Pushya is like the arrow of Rudra. It's very interesting, something I'm going to have to digest in my own way. Maybe that's something I could make a video of down the line. But for now, we're going to stick to what we're reading in our text. So, as if this sequence of events was not already incomprehensible, the saga continues. As Rudra pierces Prajapati with an arrow, Prajapati's seed spills to earth and becomes a lake. In an attempt to continue Prajapati's creative act, interrupted by Rudra, i.e. creation in the manifest world, the gods surround the lake with sacrificial fire. Enlivened by Agni, Prajapati's vital seed births the Adityas and the enlightened rishis Brighu and Angiras, as well as Brihaspati. Brihaspati is the figure of Jupiter. I believe early in this text I might have mentioned that Prajapati was the arbiter of Jupiter, but it is actually Brihaspati who is conveyed as Jupiter in the nakshatras. Story of my life. But in any case, this fire, when Prajapati's seed spilled into the earth and created this lake, the gods surrounded the lake with yajna, with sacrificial fire, which enlivened the creative seed by Agni in order to birth the Adityas, the sun gods, as well as the enlightened rishis Brighu and Giras and the sage Brihaspati. As the flames of the sacrificial fire diminish, wild beasts, a stag, a buffalo, antelope, camel, and an ass, manifest from its ashes. Having been granted lordship over such animals, Rudra claims these creatures to be his. Conditionally, the gods consent. May it please thee, father of the Maruts, that's the Rudras, not to cut us off from beholding the sun, i.e. from living. Mayst thou, powerful hero Rudra, spare our cattle and children, that we, O master of the Rudras, might be propagated by our progeny. So Shiva, Rudra, master of the Rudras and the Maruts, has called these creatures his. But the gods say that we need these animals, we need our cattle and children, so that we might be propagated by our progeny. According to this Aitareya Brahmana legend, creation commences when Prajapati's seed is offered to and unites with the sacrificial fire of Agni. A variation of this theme is found in the much later Puranic legend, the Brahma Darshana, in which Brahma's spilt seed is cast into the sacrificial fire. The Shatapatha Brahmana legend parallels that of the Aitareya Brahmana up to the sacrificial offering of Prajapati's seed. At this point, the gods become deeply remorseful. They attempt to rectify their sacerdotal wrong by making an offering of that portion of Prajapati's body pierced by Rudra's arrow. The gods first offer, I should make sure I'm not, there's a note here. The gods become deeply remorseful. They attempt to rectify their sacerdotal wrong by making an offering to that portion of Prajapati's body pierced by Rudra's arrow. So the gods feel bad that they had to take out Prajapati with Rudra's arrow. Now, the gods first offer Prajapati's injured part, here called the Prashitra, to Bhaga, who rules Uttara Falguni. But when Bhaga sees it, his eyes are burnt out, and thus they say that Bhaga is blind. Next, they offer it to Pusan, who rules Revati. But when Pusan tastes the Prasitra, his teeth are knocked out. Hence, they say Pusan is toothless, and therefore, when they prepare a mess of boiled rice for Pusan, they prepare it from ground rice, as is done for one toothless. Finally, the gods offer it to Brihaspati, who rules Pushya, who requests Savitri, ruled by the nakshatra Hasta, to first impel the Prasitra, after which Brihaspati accepts it without harm. Gosh, it's almost like reading a novel. When you read a novel and there's these foretelling elements, it's like you see these little things being laid out at the beginning of the novel, and you don't think about anything of it. And then later on, as the novel proceeds, you realize, oh, that's why that was there, that foretelling of what's going to be happening later in the novel. All these little things are foretelling seeds of the nature of each of the nakshatras that we're talking about here. Uttara Falguni, who can be blind, which is interesting when you understand the nature of bhagha and enjoyment of material desires. Pusan, which rules Revati, having no teeth, which is an interesting thing of understanding what Pusan is as the enjoyer and nourisher of Revati. And Brihaspati, which rules Pushya Nakshatra, has to impel this piece of Prajapati, this Prashitra, and so that Brihaspati can accept it without harm. It's interesting to figure out what impel means. hopefully we will learn. Comparing the story of creation as told in the Rig Veda to the latter Brahmanic enhancements. Brahmanic meaning, the Aitareya Brahmana, the Shastra Brahmana. I should get that name right. The Satapatha Brahmana and the Aitareya Brahmana. These are commentaries on the text that are given from Vedic ages. So they are important, but they're different. They come from different cultural underpinnings. And comparing the original Rig Veda story from the Rig Veda to these Brahmanic commentaries, we have several consistent themes. These include 1, cosmic impulse or desire as the impetus for creation. Desire. 2, the impregnation by Prajapati of his daughter-wife, Aditi. 3, the birth of Agni on earth from Prajapati's spilt seed. And 4, the subsequent birth of all creatures from that moment. Now, what differs significantly is the reaction of the gods to Prajapati's cosmic yajna. In the Rig Veda, having borne witness to Prajapati's act of creation, the gods join hands and dance for joy. In the later Brahmana legends, in these commentaries, the gods are outraged and they birth Rudra for the purpose of aborting Prajapati's creative act. Ashamed of their actions, the gods disclaim Rudra and enlist the help of Agni to reinstate Prajapati's sacrifice. Very interesting threads. The hostility previously limited to Prajapati and Rudra now encompasses all the gods. From this point forward, Rudra is outcast, never again to be invited by the gods to their sacrificial yagnas. At best, he is eligible only for the sacrificial remnants, a fancy term for the sacrificial leftovers. This all has to do with the character of Rudra, of Shiva, and of the nakshatra Ardra. Shiva being this always outcast character who's not invited to the sacrifices often. He has a bunch of cronies and goblins and weird ghoul things, and he hangs out at crematoriums where the dead are. He covers himself in ashes and lets go transcendentally of this world because he is the gate of the transcendental beyond this world. When they apply that gate, crazy things can happen. Just like Shiva power is the craziest power that you can invoke. Shaivism is the deepest tantric invoker of self-power in all of the ways of understanding the Vedas. And so Shiva is this important character. It's almost like a transcendental absolute that is a useful thing, but you don't want it to be an acid that burns the container that holds it. We all want to invoke the Shiva power of being so beyond this world that none of our karma gets in the way of transcendental bliss and awareness within. But if we completely let go of the world, we will ruin the procreative enjoyment of life, of love, of patience, of accepting the tantra of the material world. This is why the gods, they didn't kill Shiva. They don't eliminate him, but Shiva is outcast from the regular material providence that the rest of the nakshatra gods convey. The nakshatras are a way of showing us how to live a happy material life. Shiva is for those who want to go beyond happiness into pure awareness, which is still important. Ideally, you do what happens in the Shiva myth, where Shiva is enticed by Prajapati, by Parvati. Parvati is the lover of Shiva, who brings the transcendental down to earth in a seductive way, so that earth can be enlivened by the transcendental energy of Shiva. And Shiva allows us to enjoy those things while also recognizing that they are merely vessels for the moksha. It's the deepest, most psychedelic way that I can put all of that. Very deep. Now, let's get back to our reading here. We'll be reading about Shiva well enough once we get into the Shiva aspect of the nakshatras. I see my friend Teresa is picking up what I'm putting down here, and I appreciate that. I appreciate all you guys for being here. Now, one more variation on the above thematics is worth mentioning. This is presented in the Gopata Brahmana of the Atharva Veda, arguably the last of the Brahmanas codified prior to the Puranic period. The Gopata Brahmana recounts a magnificent yajna sacrifice ritual in which Prajapati, in a grave act of disrespect, no doubt still holding a grudge for having been pierced, denies Rutra his rightful share of the sacrificial offering. Revengeful over this exclusion, Rudra seizes the offering and pierces it with his arrow, causing a small piece, the prashitra, to fall to the ground. Alarmed by the offering that has been fragmented, the gods attempt to rectify the sacrificial interruption by first offering it to Bhaga, who once again loses his eyes, and then to Pushan, who once again loses his teeth. Here, Pushan is called the toothless eater of cakes, meaning sacrificial offerings. The Gopata Brahmana adds a few more new details to this dire sequence of events. The prashitra is next offered to Savitri, who forgets to impel the offering. As Savitri accepts the prashitra, his hands are severed. It's interesting because Hasta, which is the nakshatra that rules Savitri, is symbolized by the hands. Later, Savitri's hands are replaced with golden ones, which explains his epithet, Hiranyahasta, which is the golden-handed one. Hasta has to do with dexterity, creating things, doing manipulative things, or possibly tricky things with the hands. Finally, the yet-to-be sanctified prashitra is presented to Brihaspati, the signifier of Jupiter, who removes its harmful quality by consecrating it with sacred speech, known as Brahman. For this, he is declared Brahmanaspati, the Lord of Brahman. Brihaspati is also Brahmanaspati, the Lord of Brahman, the transcendental, all-encompassing. This legend, as well as the previous ones, explains the sacrificial protocol of treating with extreme caution anything separated or broken off from the offering. Ever since the sacrificial prashitra blinded Bhaga, knocked out Pushan's teeth, and sliced off Savitri's hands, it is considered the dangerous part of the offering. Hence, all forms of contact, even by the gods, are forbidden, except by the Hotri, the priest, here represented by Brihaspati, who must first consecrate the prashitra with sacred speech thereby rendering it harmless. I hope you guys dig. Like, a lot of this stuff that we're reading about is giving us information on the sacrificial yajna, which is the heart of all things Vedic. It is inside it. This is a large, thick book. And all of the consciousness conveyed in this book, which is a condensation of all the Vedas, is condensed further when you observe a real Brahmanic yajna ceremony. And this book is kind of conveying the importance of all these little details and elements of the yajna ceremony. Critically, this Gopata Brahmana, this particular commentary that tells of this part of the story, provides a nearly seamless sieg for the infamous legend of Daksha's grand sacrificial yajna, which is the Daksha Yajna Bada. It's the exclusion from Daksha's yajna, as recounted in the Puranas and told in the following section. This is the next thing that we're going to talk about. Oh, I do have chocolate. Sweet. I was just thinking in my head, God, I wish I had a piece of chocolate. And it turns out I did. Still got quite a bit to go here, folks. There is a lot to all of these legends. Now, let's look into Daksha's sacrificial fire ceremony. Daksha's grand sacrificial yajna is frequently cited in post-Vedic literature, including the Mahabharata and Ramayana. However, a fair degree of variation is found amongst these texts. Known as the Daksha Yajna Bada, the epic event continues and embellishes the cosmogony hymns of the Rig Veda, as well as the subsequent Brahmana stories that tell of Rudra's piercing of Prajapati. Implicating many nakshatra devatas, the lore is symbolic of the inherent but opposing universal forces of creation and destruction. Brahma, the Hindu god of creation, is known for his magnificent sacrifices. His son is Daksha, father of 60 illustrious daughters. So this is a Purana. Yeah, okay. So the reason that this is a Purana that we're reading here. And so in the Puranas, Brahma is acclaimed the creator, and Daksha is his mind-born son. So really, Brahma and Daksha are the same person. In the Puranas, Daksha is considered to be the mind-born son of Brahma, who then gives birth to 60 illustrious daughters. Daksha bestows 27 of his offspring, the nakshatras, the 27 nakshatras, in marriage to the moon. The other daughters are married off to various enlightened seers. One of Daksha's daughters is Sati, who is eventually wed to Rudra, that being Shiva, which is a beautiful psychedelic story in itself. Can't wait to read about it. Now, the first account of the Dakshayagna Bada, of the Daksha sacrifice ceremony, as told in the Mahabharata, is brief. The Satya Yuga has just ended. In preparation for the transition into the Treta Yuga, the gods joined together to perform sacrifice. Fearing what Rudra might do if invited to their yajna, The gods intentionally fail to assign him a portion of the sacrificial offerings. When Rudra hears what the gods are up to, he appears at the sacrifice clad in a deerskin, determined to destroy the sacrifice with his mighty bow and arrow. His appearance is the cause of various inauspicious omens. The earth begins to shrink in fear. The wind ceases to blow, and the sacrificial fire no longer blazes. The stars wander aimlessly in the sky. The light of the sun disappears, and the glow of the moon fades into darkness. As the gods tremble in fright, Rudra pierces Daksha with his arrow. Assuming the shape of a stag, Daksha flees to the heights of the sky. Daksha, remember, being Prajapati, the father of creation. Next, Rudra, Shiva, breaks Savitri's arms, tears Bhaga's eyes out, and knocks out Pusan's teeth with his foot. Many of the other gods are paralyzed by Rudra, and hence they are unable to escape. Rudra is pissed, and Rudra is one entity that is never well served to get pissed. Terrified for their lives, the gods propitiate Rudra, praising his countless glories. Pleased by their eulogies, Rudra returns to Savitri his arms, to Bhagha his eyes, and to Pusan his teeth. The other gods are no longer paralyzed, and they immediately flee the scene. Now, this is all given actually in the Mahabharata, right? Now, the legend continues in a later section of the Mahabharata. Here it is mentioned in reference to an inquiry into the origin of fever. The following sequence of long-ago events is explained. One day, Daksha Prajapati announces to the universe that he is about to perform a great horse yajna. Accompanied by Indra, the gods make their way to quickly to the sacrificial grounds. Noticing the sudden absence of the gods, Sati queries Rudra as to their whereabouts. Rudra explains that the gods have gone to participate in a grand yajna being performed by her father, Daksha. When asked by Sati why he was not invited, Rudra explains that the gods had decided long ago never to offer him a share in their sacrifices. This both saddens and outrages Sati. You know, this is that story I was talking about. It's deeply psychedelic if you understand it, because Sati is material existence. Daksha is the progenitive aspect of all existence. Shiva is the transcendental spirit, desire for moksha and its destruction. Shiva is the destruction of creation. Shiva is the end point. It's the meaning. It's the goal of creation. And it is the love factor of a transcendental sense of love, of all things beyond all things. And Sita, which is the princess inside of ourselves that seeks the dark prince of Shiva, of moksha. And so Sati is us caught between material civility of Daksha, the laws and order of the universe of Daksha, and the sublimating desire to transcend it. But Sati shows that we need to, again, use Tantra to combine moksha with our lived experience in order that we can be bodhisattvas, or for those who choose to ultimately wed to Shiva and be born into moksha, liberation, and nirvana. But Sati is always caught between these two forces, the father, and her beloved lover, Shiva, which would obliterate all things if left to his own devices. This is why the gods, again, don't bring Shiva around, because it's like, we want you to exist, but we don't want you to mess up what's happening on Earth. This is the non-dualist perspective. It's that not every person who's spiritual needs to go on a mountain and ignore what's happening inside of their generative tissue, except for those who are called to do so. So, Rudra has explained to Sati that the gods decided long ago never to offer him a share of their sacrifices. She is saddened and enraged by this, for surely no one is more deserving of the sacrificial offerings than her husband, Shiva. Realizing the deep grief felt by his wife, Rudra summons his bull, Nandi, along with his host of ghastly beings, and proceeds to Daksha's yajna, the sacrificial fire ceremony. Arriving at the sacrifice, Rudra and his entourage commence to destroy everything and everyone in sight. This includes the sacrificial fire, which Rudra extinguishes with the blood of the gods. In terror, Daksha assumes the form of a stag and flies upwards, like we've already heard. Filled with great wrath, Rudra leaps into the air with his bow and arrow in pursuit of Daksha. A drop of sweat produced by Rudra's anger appears on his forehead. The drop falls to earth and springs into a blazing fire. So fierce and powerful is the fire that all the gods are certain the yuga is about to end. The yuga, the age. It's like, oh, this is the world ending. I guess we didn't think this was going to happen so soon, but okay, here it is. From that dreadful fire, a being appears. He is short in stature, has blood-red eyes, a green beard, and dark complexion. Turning towards the sacrificial grounds, that being consumes Daksha's sacrifice. Next, he rushes towards the gods, causing them to flee in all directions. Now, arriving just in the nick of time, Brahma assures Rudra that henceforth he will be assigned a sacrificial share in all the yajnas. As for the being born from Rudra's wrath, Brahma names him Fever. He is fearful that fever will engulf the entire world in fire, and pleads for Rudra to disperse the being into many separate parts. Gratified by Brahma's promise of a share in the sacrificial offerings, Rudra distributes fever by imparting him as various forms of disease that reside in the earth, water, animals, and men. Should a man or creature be afflicted with fever, it is said to be Rudra's wrathful being who first appeared during Daksha's grand yajna. That comes from the Mahabharata. Very interesting psychedelic thing. Kind of almost shows that when someone has a fever, it's rooted in some angry lack of cohesion with the harmonious flow of the universe and of sacrifice. Dharma. Now, later in the Mahabharata, more details of this gruesome event are revealed. We are told that not only is Rudra not invited to Daksha's sacrifice, but the yajna takes place at the heights of the Himavat mountain, the very abode of Rudra, of Shiva. Adding insult to injury, Daksha informs the gods that the yajna is in honor of the greatness of Vishnu rather than Shiva. We all know the sort of back and forth that those two have together. Vaishnavism versus Shaivism in Vedanta. So, everyone is invited to the sacrifice. The gods with their spouses, the rishis and ancestors, even Rudra's sons, the Maruts, also known as the Rudras, show up alongside Indra. Further, we are told that it is not just Daksha's idea to exclude Rudra. All of the gods consent. This is just a big, everybody picking on poor Rudra in a way. Although Rudra, in a way, caused all this. Becoming aware of this circumstance, Rudra creates from his mouth Virabhadra, which translates to mean distinguished hero, a most wrathful creature blazing with flames. They've got 100 arms, 100 hands, and in each holds a different weapon of destruction. Virabhadra also creates 1,000 wrathful creatures from the pores of his skin, and they quickly line up behind him. So Rudra instructs Virabhadra and his troops to hurry to the sacrificial grounds and destroy everything in sight. So again, this is a sort of another telling of the same tale. Like her husband, Sati is agitated to no end with the state of affairs. From her wrath comes forth Mahakali, a dreadful form of Sati. In the Shiva Purana version of the legend, Sati, humiliated by her father's disrespectful actions, sacrifices her life to the sacrificial fire. That's the common one that I've heard. During the pursuant battle, Agni has his tongue severed and Daksha his head severed. The latter is placed with a goat's head, and Sati eventually reincarnates as Parvati and once again weds Rudra, or Shiva. That's the classic tantric narrative that many people probably might recognize. So the same sort of thing happens in this scene when Mahakali is called forth, joining forces with Virabhadra. Mahakali heads to the sacrificial grounds and kills everybody. Their troops of the Virabhadra's troops go in, and darkness consumes the world as they near the sacrifice. They set fire to the grounds, they crush the vessels and the sacrificial vessels, and take for themselves all the sacrificial offerings. Then they go after the gods themselves, they cut off Daksha's head, and all of the gods kneel before Rudra seeking his forgiveness. Rudra acquiesces and restores the sacrifice back to its original condition in exchange for the gods admitting to his glory and greatness and agreeing to give him his due share of sacrificial offerings at their yajnas. Really, at like a deep level, this story is conveying free will. Sati and Rudra are like free will. The gods are the perfect purity and truth of the mathematical laws of Vishnu, of the universe. Even Indra, all of those characters of the gods are like the numerological, metaphysical harmony of the laws of nature and spiritual truth. Rudra and Sati are the elements of Maya, which need to be fully manifested, realized, understood, and the alignment of what we are in our very particular 666 karma here on earth. What we are needs to be respected because the gods respect and reciprocate the nature of what we are in order for us to come to cohesion and harmony with all these things. The gods have to give a respect to what Shiva is as the individual desire in all of us to attain moksha through the specific path of our karma. Because we're not robots. This is God's play. This is God's Leela. If it was an automatic thing, if there was no free will, then the gods would just do their sacrifice and their ceremony, and the outcast character of Shiva would have nothing to do with it, and reality would just be a robot. Shiva is the dark character that adds the livingness of free will to humanity and life on all the planets. It sucks, and the human character, the character of Shiva, almost and Sati together almost ruin the sacrifice, because the sacrifice is the most important picture of it all. It's the great dharma of the universe. But Shiva, this uncomfortable, he's almost like a teenager. The parents are having this party, and the teenager wants to be a part of it, but like is this awkward character. But the parents almost don't want to bring him in. But then the teenager bursts through and says, hey, everybody, guess what? If I want to become a part of everything, I have to be a part of this. And it's awkward at first. The teenager almost ruins the party. But then everybody gets that the teenager, Shiva, is a part of the pantheon of the gods. Our human imperfections is a part of the desire for moksha. For if there was nothing to be liberated, there would be no liberation. Very psychedelic, cool story. I'd like to know if you guys are with me on that. This is kind of how I'm interpreting this, and this is me stewing these stories in my own brain. Now, we are going into our next chapter, and that's going to be talking about Katuranana Brahma and his son Daksha. So we've just talked about some stories from the Mahabharata as well as from the Shiva Purana. Now we're getting into some different literature talking about this episode with Prajapati. We're still talking about Rohini Nakshatra here. In describing the unmanifest universe, Vayu Purana employs almost identical language as that found in the Rig Veda. In the beginning, there was nothing in the universe. The Brahman, the divine essence, alone was everywhere. The Brahman had neither color nor scent. It could not be felt or touched. It had no origin, no beginning, or no end. The Brahman was constant, and it was the origin of everything that was destined to be in the universe. And the universe at this time was shrouded in darkness. Again, it's just like we hear in Genesis in the Bible. And that comes from the Vayu Purana. Now, when the time comes for creation, the impersonal Brahman divides itself into three. It's Vishnu, the Lord of Preservation, Brahma, the Lord of Creation, and Shiva, the Lord of Dissolution. Hence, Rig Vedic Devatas, Vishnu, presides over Shravana Nakshatra, Prajapati, who resides over Rohini Nakshatra, and Rudra, who presides over Ardra Nakshatra. These become the entrenched Hindu triad. So it's Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. The following is based upon various passages found in the Shiva Purana. In order to bring living creatures into the world, Brahma births many mind-born sons, Manasuputras, including the Shapta Rishis and Daksha Prajapati. When the enlightened Manasaputras refused to procreate, Brahma's frustration quickly turns to wrath, from which Rudra is birthed. And this is coming from, again, the Shiva Purana. Ordered by his father to procreate, Rudra produces only frightful creatures in his own likeness. Distraught, Brahma decides to take matters into his own hands. He emits from his body a daughter, just as Daksha Prajapati had done in the Vedas. She is named Sandhya, morning twilight. We notice the similarity in names of Brahma's Puranic daughter, Sandhya, morning twilight, with Prajapati's Rigvedic daughter, Usha's, which means dawn. Sort of like the same thing, really, right? Brahma is captivated by Sandhya's perfection, and in that moment of desire, Kama Deva, god of love, is produced from his being, thrusting Brahma into a whirlwind obsession. Interesting. Kama Deva is being the god of love. Kama being desire in this way. Interesting. Irene has dreams about Shiva. My girlfriend has said the same thing. And powerfully scary is probably a good depiction of it too. Now, so intensely does Brahma desire Sandhya that he grows 3 additional heads as she circumambulates him, and a 4th as she floats above him. On multiple occasions, Brahma's puffed-up attitude results in the loss of one of his 5 heads. Thus, Puranic Brahma is known as Katuranana, 4-faced. So really, Brahma, it's psychedelic. Brahma wants to experience all the directions of existence. The daughter, Sandhya, being all the directions and spaces in which creation can occur. Brahma wants to experience them all. So, Shiva, Rudra, having become quite the proper ascetic, gets wind of this nonsense and ridicules Brahma in front of the other gods. Duly ashamed but determined to get even, Brahma instructs his son Daksha and wife to give birth to a girl who, when born, is named Sati, virtuous woman. His plan is for Shiva to experience the longing for a woman. Sati enters into severe penance in order to attract Shiva's attention, while Brahma solicits the support of Kama Deva and his 5 flower arrows of love to entice Shiva into romance. To make a long story short, I've heard this story in other ways, and it is a long story. To make a long story short, Shiva does soon yearn for Sati. Accepting the role of householder, Shiva asks for her hand in marriage, fulfilling Brahma's wish for revenge. Shiva, being the transcendental principle, is not supposed to get locked up or entangled up in any sort of forms. So Brahma is getting revenge on Rudra now by Shiva, Rudra, losing its essential nature of being transcending reality by being pulled into a particular love for the particular form of Sati. It's an interesting depiction of love. Now, in the meantime, humiliated by her father's indiscriminate lust, Sandhya retreats to the forest to practice austerities and worship Shiva. I just want to... So Sandhya is Daksha's wife, and Sati is the daughter of Daksha and Sati. So Sandhya is the mother of Sati. She retreats to the forest to practice austerities and worship Shiva, having been humiliated by Brahma's indiscriminate lust. After a few hundred years, Shiva is pleased with Sandhya's penance and grants her a boon of choice. She replies, "Nobody should have lust towards the member of his own clan. There should be no virtuous and chaste woman greater than me in this whole world. Anybody other than my husband who looks at me with evil intentions shall become an impotent man." Then, upon Shiva's request, Sandhya offers her life to the sacrificial fire. In her next life, Sandhya incarnates as Arundhati, morning star, and marries the very virtuous rishi Vashishta, son of Varuna and Mitra. Vasishta is an exalted member of the Sapta Rishis, the seven sages. Vashishta has a very important Vedic text known as the Vashishta's Yoga. That is something I'm going to get into pretty soon. At this same time in the history of the universe, trouble is brewing for the spouses of the Sapta Rishis. Agni has fallen hopelessly in love with all seven of them, quite to the chagrin of Svaha, who had high hopes of marrying Agni. We hear about that story in the Agni deity video that I've done. In a rather despicable act of desperation, Svaha impersonates the wives one by one, each having her way with Agni. Right, it's a weird story too. When it comes time to impersonate Arundhati, Svaha is at a loss, because Arundhati has received the boon that her reputation would forever remain unblemished. So thus Arundhati manages to maintain her spotless reputation as a woman of great chastity. Unfortunately, the other Saptarishis' wives are unable to exonerate their names. Thus, they are cast out of their husband's stellar abode, the Big Dipper, and they eventually take up residency in Kritika, which is Agni's nakshatra. It seems as though every noble act ever performed by the Puranic version of Brahma, is eventually tainted by his out-of-control desires. Even in the most sacrosanct of occasions, Brahma's yearning nature gets the best of him. For example, at the wedding of Shiva and Sati, remember that Sati is Brahma's granddaughter, Brahma is gravely afflicted with desire as he gazes upon Sati's feet, showing beneath her dress. Agitated, Brahma inappropriately begins to move his glance upwards, but is frustrated that Sati's face is veiled. Placing several wet logs on the fire, Brahma waits for smoke to fill the sacrificial grounds. Then what happens next is recounted by Brahma himself. And this is still part of the Shiva Purana. This is part 1, the Rudra Samhita, chapter 19. This is Brahma speaking to the sage Narada. "Then, O sage, afflicted by the Cupid, Kamadeva, and delighted in the heart of hearts, I lifted her veil and stared into the face of Sati. I looked at the face of Sati many a time. I was helpless in curbing the onset of a sensuous orgasm. 4 drops of my semen, virile, got displaced and fell on the ground like drops of dew as a result of my staring into her face. O sage Narada, to whom I narrate this text, then I was stunned into silence. I was surprised. I became suspicious. I covered up the semen drops, lest anyone should see them. But the Lord Shiva saw it by his divine vision. The trickling down of my semen excited his fury. Now, alert to Brahma's shenanigans, Shiva lunges at him with the intent of annihilation. Fortunately for Brahma, Vishnu intervenes just in time. He reminds Shiva that if he does away with Brahma, no one will be left to continue with creation. Thereby, Vishnu rescues Brahma from an untimely death and earns Brahma's eternal allegiance. Now, before turning our attention to son Daksha, it is worth noting Brahma's Brahma-centric perspective on life and his admiration for his own greatness as creator of the universe. For example, one day, filled with enormous arrogance, Brahma proclaims to Vishnu to be the firstborn of the gods, and hence Vishnu's superior. The Puranic status of firstborn unquestionably belongs to Vishnu, but Brahma is strangely blinded by his own sense of greatness. In many Puranic texts, Brahma's birth occurs subsequent to Vishnu's. That's, for example, in the Shiva Purana, Brahma is birthed atop a lotus growing from Vishnu's navel. So in order to prove his preeminence, Brahma challenges Vishnu to a fight. Witnessing the conflict, the Devatas quickly summon Shiva for help. Shiva appears as a pillar of fire, meaning in his linga form, between Vishnu and Brahma. Curious as to whence this pillar was established and how high it towers, Vishnu and Brahma agree to a contest. Whoever is first to return with an answer to this question shall be deemed the superior god. Assuming the form of a boar, this is an old Vedic story, Vishnu assumes the form of a boar and enters the depths of the earth to determine the base of the pillar, while Brahma heads upwards as a swan to establish its height. Exhausted, but not yet having reached the base of the pillar, Vishnu returns to the battlefield, only to find Brahma gloating with the news of having reached its top. Vishnu graciously bows down to Brahma, accepting his superiority. Obviously, Vishnu, the ruler of the nakshatra Shravana, is a little bit more of a humble fellow than Brahma. But in reality, Brahma has not made it to the top at all. Having witnessed the entire episode and delighted with Vishnu's truth-telling, Shiva says, "O dear Hari, Vishnu, I am pleased with you because you strictly adhered to truth in spite of your desire to be a lord. Hence, among the general public, you will have a footing equal to mine. You will be honored likewise." Then turning to Brahma, Shiva emits from his angry brow his fierce form, Bhairava, which means terrible and frightful, and instructs him to cut off one of Brahma's heads for committing such falsehood. Wow. It's beautiful, and it goes to show you what Vishnu is. Vishnu is really and truly, when you think about it deeply, the truth, the spirit, the Christ, the aspect of self which wants to be true to itself through awareness. Vishnu is considered Krishna. And Vishnu is, that's why Vaishnava Hinduism suggests Vishnu as the central person of it all. Although really this Shiva Purana tells us that they are both kind of equal and can be conveyed as the great God in different ways. It's kind of an up and a down, you know, they kind of create each other. But this is a beautiful story because it shows that Vishnu has this element of truth, of spiritual dharma. And this is why Vishnu becomes the father of dharma, of truth, and of the things given in, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, when Vishnu takes the form of Krishna. Brahma doesn't do anything like that. Brahma just creates. Brahma is like an aspect of our ego that perpetuates and radiates outward. It's the pesky aspect of reality, which is one of the three tripartite aspects of creation. This is how the Vedic people consider it. It's like even our own procreative instincts can get us into trouble. But Tantra says we shouldn't cut off our genitals because it can get us into this trouble. The point is to sublimate it, to transmute it from an aspect and an understanding of self-love through Vishnu. In any case, the dharma that the self abides by goes deeper than the procreative desire of the ego. Hence Vishnu being more praised than Brahma through this story. It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Now, having removed Brahma's fifth head, Bhairava being the angry form of Shiva, prepares to destroy Brahma. However, Vishnu once again pleads for Brahma's life, persuading Shiva to curse him instead. O Brahma, in order to extort honor from the people, you assumed the role of the Lord in roguish manner. O Brahma, in order to extort honor from the people, you assumed the role of Lord in roguish manner. Hence you shall not be honored, nor shall you have your own temple or festival. To this day, in all of India, there are only really a handful of temples dedicated to Brahma, because Brahma is a pure potential that has not been wholly, is not considered a wholly conscious harmony with the universe, which Vishnu and Shiva are. Shiva is the absolute ultimate reality, and Vishnu is the reality put to its holiest ends and purposes. Susie has asked that there are only a few temples to Brahma in India, and this is why, Susie. Yes, that is what I'm reading and understanding, is that this whole story depicts why Brahma is not hugely revered in India. Now, like father, like son, the constant feuding and hostility between Brahma and Shiva persists between Daksha and Shiva. Most notorious is Daksha's exclusion of Shiva from his yagna invitation list. In his haughtiness, Daksha proclaims, Shiva is a worthless fellow. He is not fit to be worshipped together with the other gods. He wears skulls and destroys all that is created. And so the Vedic animosity between the creative, Brahma, Daksha, and destructive, Rudra, Shiva, endures well into the Puranic period. Perhaps rightly so, for every time Brahma, Daksha, the creative principle, turns around, Rudra, Shiva, is there destroying his creative acts. It's this beautiful, necessary infinity symbol that's happening here. In Daksha's next incarnation, having been annihilated by Shiva in the battle pursuant to the Daksha Yagna Bhatta, that epic, great sacrifice that we've mentioned previously, Daksha, in his next incarnation, is delegated Brahma's role as chief progenitor. In this second embodiment, Daksha becomes expert in the knowledge of fertility, and first among the Devatas to engage in sexual intercourse as a means for reproduction. Because he was very expert in performing fruitive activity, he was called by the name Daksha, meaning the very expert. That's what Daksha means, interestingly. Lord Brahma therefore engaged Daksha in the work of generating living entities and maintaining them. This actually comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 30. Interesting. So Daksha marries and gives birth to 60 daughters. 27 of these are the nakshatras, including the sensuous and lovely Rohini. They are awarded to Soma, the moon, in marriage. 13 are presented to sage Kashyapa, and his remaining daughters are married off to other enlightened sages. As recounted in a later chapter, Daksha's bestowal of his daughters in marriage to the moon is conditioned on Soma's agreement to spend equal time with each throughout the month. This promise Soma finds impossible to keep due to Rohini's great beauty, or perhaps due to his uncontrollable sense nature, as Soma is, Chandra, the moon. This causes intense jealousy and rivalry between the other 26 nakshatra wives and the sister Rohini. Even the pristine and exalted 28th nakshatra sister Abhijit is overcome with envy and repairs to the woods to perform austerities for her ungodly sentiments. Could be a story talking about why Abhijit is not conveyed in the typical 27 cycle of the nakshatras. So next, what we're looking for is Prajapati's association with the year. Another remarkable Rig Vedic cosmogony hymn. This is from Mandala 10, chapter 121. Poetically reveals the circumstances surrounding Prajapati's birth, an occasion absent in other creation hymns. According to this seer's vision, the cosmic waters, the womb of the universe, is impregnated by the productive virility of Agni. From this, a golden egg, Hiranyagarbha, is conceived, giving birth to Ka, which is translated as who. The waters coming to everything existing, meaning everything covering and comprehending everything. That's Sayana, coinciding with everything. Received Agni as their germ, so as to produce Ka. So what this is saying is the waters coming to everything and covering everything received Agni as their germ so as to produce Ka, which is who, beingness in a way. Upon its birth, Ka surveys the waters all around, containing creative powers, Daksha, and commences cosmic sacrifice, which births creation. In this way, he unveils the manifest world. This Shukta concludes with the identification of Ka as Prajapati. What god shall we adore with our oblation? Prajapati. There is none other than you in existence to all these beings. May our aspirations, for which we dedicate ourselves to you, be ours. May we be the possessors of grand riches. Now, including the pre-creative state of the universe, darkness there was, covered by darkness, a plasmic continuum of waters, in which there was nothing distinguishable. So, including this, the cosmic events preceding creation implicate the sequential nakshatras Purva, Ashada, and Shatabhishak. Interesting. So, Purva, Ashada, and Shatabhishak are involved in the creation myths that we're describing here. In the beginning, the dark stillness of the vast waters, it's Varuna, Shatabhishak, concealed the unmanifest, that's Brahma and Abhijit. Receiving the universal germ, the waters became fertile. It's Apas of Purva Ashada. The author here, Radha, assumes that the waters of the pre-creative state of the universe are neuter or even masculine. That's Varuna, Shatabhishak. And the cosmic waters impregnated by Agni are feminine. That's Apas of the nakshatra Purva Ashada. So Shatabhishak is the masculine side of water, and Purva Ashada is the feminine side of water that gets impregnated by Agni. Interesting. So this receiving the universal germ, the waters become fertile through Purva Ashada, and this gives life to the gods through Uttara Ashada. It's the Vishva Devas, because the Vishva Devas are the 33 forces of the Devas. There are technically 33 nakshatra deities. And what we see here is that this story is conveyed through these latter nakshatras as well. Shatabhishak, as well as Abhijit, are this unmanifest potential. Once impregnated by Agni, which was Kritika, the waters become fertile through Purva Ashada, and this gives birth to the Vishva Devas, which is presided by Uttara Ashada. This is a very cool background understanding of the whole nakshatra story. Now, in preparation for the phenomenal world, Vishnu, as Shravana nakshatra, strides 3 times, dimensioning Akasha into the heavenly, atmospheric, and earthly realms. The Mahabhutas, the great elements, form, along with the sun, moon, pole star, and nakshatras, through this manifestation. It's the Mahabhutas, and this creates the sun, moon, the pole star, and the nakshatras, which are conveyed through the Vasus, ruled by Dhanishta nakshatra. So we contrast this with the sequential nakshatras of Kritika through Pushya as concerning the manifestation of creation by Prajapati. So it's kind of like what this is saying. Okay. What this is saying, and I hope you guys are following me here. After Kritika, from Kritika through to Pushya, is what happens once creation has been manifested. What we see is happening from Shatabhishak all the way up to basically Dhanishta. Yeah. What's happening from Shatabhishak to Dhanishta in the nakshatras is the karmic things leading up to creation. The karmic forces of the waters, the seed of progeneration that leads to the actual manifestation that we see from Kritika, Rohini, Mrigashirsha, Pushya, all of these stories we've read so far. Right now we're hearing the prequel to that story. It's like what created the nothingness? What happened in the nothingness of the water that eventually birthed creation? That's what we're learning about right now. It's an amazing cyclical thing that the nakshatras go through here. Now, the Shatapatha Brahmana embellishes upon Rig Veda, Mandala 10, chapter 121, explaining that the waters are impregnated due to their performance of severe austerities. It's tapas. Tapas is austerity. It also adds that Prajapati was birthed from the Hiranyagarbha in a year's time. Prajapati was birthed from this golden egg in a year's time. This comes from the Shatapatha Brahmana. We read that in the beginning this universe was water, nothing but a sea of water, as it's given in Genesis in the Bible. The waters desired, how can we be reproduced? They toiled and performed fervid devotions, tapas, when they were becoming heated. A golden egg, Hiranyagarbha, a golden egg, was produced. The year, indeed, was not then in existence. This golden egg floated about for as long as the space of a year. And in a year's time, a man, this Prajapati, was produced therefrom. Which is interesting. It's interesting that there's a connection of time. There's depiction of time as, usually we think of time as being the earth going around the sun, and that's what creates our year. It's interesting that time is insinuated right from the beginning here. So here Prajapati is connected to Kala, which is time, through his identification with the year. Indeed, having been birthed in a year's period, Prajapati proclaims the year to be his counterpart. In a year's time, a man, this Prajapati, was produced therefrom, and hence a woman, a cow, or a mare brings forth within the space of a year. Hence the year metaphorically represents Prajapati's grand faculty of procreation, prajanana. Now what we hear is that this is a footnote. We read that, as is customary, the scripture provides various accounts of any singular event, as in the case of the creation of animals. For example, elsewhere in the Satapatha Brahmana, Prajapati is said to have fashioned animals and man from parts of his body. Prajapati fashioned man from his soul, a horse from his eye, a cow from his breath, a sheep from his ear, and a goat from his voice. In the Taittiriya Samhita, another commentary text on the Vedas, Prajapati, wishing to create animals, draws out his own omentum and, offering it to the sacrificial fire, produces the first creature, the goat. So there's just many stories that often convey the same thing as we read. Now, the author says, Radha, she says, no wonder the Vedas laud Prajapati time and time again for progeny and cattle. It's interesting to see these roots of things here, the roots of some of the Vedic understandings of things. Now, a second meaning of prajanana, also production, is the generation of crops whose growth, fruition, and harvest is likewise subject to the year. This supports Rohini's stellar configuration as a wain. The wain is the symbol. I'm not exactly sure what it is. I almost want to look it up. What is a wain? Rohini. So that's W-A-I-N. A wain. Yes, so the wain is the ox cart. Good. I'm glad I looked that up. When we read, it's W-A-I-N, a wain. So this is why the production of crops, whose growth, fruition, and harvest is likewise subject to the year. It's a year that we can organize the rhythm of growing agriculture and crops. And this supports Rohini's stellar configuration as a wain, as an ox cart. Now, how Prajapati came to create earthly vegetation is revealed in the following Shatapatha Brahmana legend. Having first emitted Agni from his mouth, Prajapati finds himself in a conundrum. In that Agni, I have generated a food eater for myself, but indeed there is no other food here but myself, whom surely would not eat. So, at that time, the earth is bald. This is just, we have a footnote saying that this is another creation myth. As we said at the beginning of this whole thing, it's like all of these myths are the same reality, just conveyed through different ways, right? So in this story, at the time where Prajapati gives birth to Agni through Prajapati's mouth, at the time the earth is bald, for Prajapati has yet to create plants and trees. Anxious to satiate his hunger, and finding no other food to consume, Agni turns towards his father with open mouth. Realizing the urgency of the moment, Prajapati rubs his palms together and produces ghee. He offers the ghee to the sacrificial fire, Agni, and instantly plants and trees of all varieties spring forth, spreading lush vegetation over the surface of the earth. Sacrifice being again implicated as the true arbiter of creative energy. It's through sacrifice, through dharma, that 1 + 1 = 3, through the magic of lending into what sacrifice is. Sacrifice and Agni being the deepest, first, most important god of the Vedas, is the sacrifice, the fire of spiritual Agni, to obliterate that which we are in order to go into moksha, wherein through moksha, the soul matter that contains us is greater than the sum of its parts. It's only through sacrifice that the sum of our soul karma can become greater than its parts. Thus, through sacrificial oblations, Prajapati not only creates plants and food, but also rescues himself from death. Because the creation of the universe could imply that the seed is going outward. And unless the yajna, unless dharma, unless sacrifice is applied, the seed of creation will be wasted. That's Agni is the very force that is implied by creation that would resolve the meaning and purpose of all life as we know it. It's funny. It seems the author here is riffing on what I'm talking about here. As an important aside, this legend provides insight into Agni's dharmic purpose, to be the eater, the acceptor of all sacrificial oblations on behalf of the gods. In such capacity, and as being birthed from Prajapati's mouth, Agni is known as Yajna Mukham, the mouth of the sacrifice. Mukham is the mouth, so Yajna is the sacrifice. Agni is known as Yajna Mukham. All animate and inanimate objects connected with the year, whether progeny animals, crops, trees, or plants are intimately associated with Prajapati. This makes Rohini the most prolific of the 27 nakshatras. Even desire, the very embodiment of Prajapati, is equated to the year. The year includes all objects of desire, for indeed, outside the year, there is no object of desire whatsoever, which is interesting. That comes from the Shatapatha Brahmana. So Rohini is thus the most prolific of the 27 nakshatras. Prajapati's relationship with the year does not end there, for the year is also associated with Ayus, life. The year measures the lifespan of man, and thus Prajapati is eulogized in the scriptures for a long life. With life inevitably becomes death, something Prajapati and all the gods feared deeply. It seems we have a footnote that essentially says that the depiction of a year also is conveyed as, by it being a beginning, it also has to be an ending. There's a certain term. It's terminal. Life is terminal. And so eventually and inevitably, it's almost like the gods have somewhat of a fear of Prajapati, because by naming a set time of existence, by naming existence, they are naming the inevitable the termination of existence, which is death. And eventually, in the Shatapatha Brahmana, the gods describe Prajapati as also the ender, being also the beginner. And the year was associated with it, because it's the year that brings winter, although it's also the year that brings spring and this fertility. So you gotta take one with the other in life, you know? One might wonder how it is that this divine being is fearful of death. In accordance with his grand cosmic yajna, Prajapati forsook a portion of his own immortality on behalf of mankind. Hence, one half of Prajapati was mortal and the other half immortal. With that part of him which was mortal, he was afraid of death. We read in a note in the Shatapatha Brahmana, a quote says, having Prajapati as their father, the gods are also afraid of death, but through the knowledge of sacrifice, they gain full immortality. Thus, the desire for a long and fruitful life, along with a constant awareness of death, is an inherent attribute of Rohini. The desire for a long and fruitful life, along with a constant awareness of death. This rings a bell for those with important Rohini Nakshatra placements. Prajapati performed sacrificial worship for 1,000 years to cleanse his mortal self and reclaim his immortality. As exemplified by these austerities, the scriptures proclaim that man, too, may reclaim and become aware of his immortal self through sacrifice. Not surprisingly, Prajapati becomes a central figure in all Brahmanic yajnas, honoring the cyclical nature of natural phenomena, i.e. the chaturmhamshas, the chaturmasyas, rather. That's a tough one. Chaturmasyas, the 4 seasonal sacrificial ceremonies, as well as Darsha Purnamasa, which is the new and full moon ceremony, and Dakshayana, a special version of the Darsha Purnamasa. The latter ceremony, the Dakshayana, is performed on behalf of the Yajamana, the sacrificial participant, who is desirous of offspring, cattle, food, and prosperity. Its every rite ends with the priestly utterance of vriddha, to grow, nourish, and succeed. So Prajapati is a central figure in all Brahmanic yajnas, offering the cyclical nature of natural phenomena. So it's interesting that Brahma, as a religious epithet, is not considered to be something worth praising for its holiness, as our friend Susie Underwood has already noted, that we don't often see Brahma depicted in temples and shrines and that sort of thing in India. But, however, Prajapati, as the Vedic ideal of Brahma, is a central figure in all Brahmanic yajnas. The Brahmanic yajnas are a sacrificial Vedic culture phenomenon that really runs deeper than the universal spirituality given through the three Vedic Hindu trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and through most of the temples of modern religiosity. Like, Vedas aren't so much a religion as a cultural perspective of theology, which is kind of different, Like Christianity has its Archangel Michael and its angels, and then the devils and the saints. All of this is more of like theology of Christianity, or of Christendom. But the actual religion of Christianity doesn't always involve all those things. In the same way, the theology of the Vedas pretends to the Brahmanic culture of ancient Vedic, Vedanta, and Vedic things, including the yajna, the Brahmanic yajna ceremony. And that is a cultural thing which is deeply spiritual, but not everybody who practices religion is going to necessarily even need to do it. It's more of people who are in tune with the spirituality of the Vedas and that ancient Vedic culture who would be keeping up the yajnas and these sorts of things. So not everybody would be doing them. So thus, Brahma is not configured in religion necessarily, typically, but it's a central figure, the purity of Veda almost relating to the word vitality. The Vedic yajna ceremony and the Brahmanic rites of the yajna ceremony have Prajapati and Brahma as a central figure. It's an interesting distinction to make there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a great fun time. We have one more reading to make here, and this has to do with the native. The native of Rohini Nakshatra, and this is someone typically with the moon there, but as we read, we're going to be reading also this author's depiction of what might happen when you have certain, for example, they often will put the Lagnesha, which is the ascendant lord, in Rohini, and showing what that might mean. So with that being said, this is a depiction of interpretive understandings of what it would mean to have planets in Rohini, but in particular the moon, as well as the Lagna. The moon, the Lagna, and the sun can especially be seen in what we describe as the native here. But really any emphasis of this nakshatra, whatever that means for the individual. Again, Vic Dakara has a great thing on his website where you can see which nakshatras are most emphasized in your chart. And in that thing, he does a report of the most emphasized nakshatra in your chart, even beyond just the moon, which is a different thing. So I recommend checking that out if you are interested in it. Now what we're looking at here is Rohini Nakshatra and a native of Rohini Nakshatra. ruled by a nakshatra devata whose very essence is desire. Rohini imbues a powerful desire nature to its native. This is consistent with its Jyotisha classification as a human, Manusha, nakshatra, of the earth, Prithvi element. Although the elements I'm sketchy of. Some of the elements, the tattvas, are aligned with the nakshatras, but the elements begin their classification at Ashwini. So we have to remember, I should say this now too, is that much of what we read here is the interpretation style of this author who uses sidereal rashis and who also thinks, I believe, when I read it, she kind of she contends with the Vimshotari lord of, for example, Rohini being ruled by the moon. So there's might be a bit of dirtied up knowledge in here. We're going to read it and see what kind of cream we can separate from the runny milk of this author's particular interpretation. The most prolific of nakshatras, Rohini is notorious for progeny. The Rig Vedic character of Daksha Prajapati and Aditi give birth to 12 sons, the Adityas. And Puranic Daksha has 60 daughters. So Daksha being Prajapati, being the deity of this nakshatra. Rohini's fecundity extends to material success and opulence. Such prosperity is most often attributable to the resourceful and self-sufficient nature of this native. When we listen to the stories of Prajapati, we learn that he never once seeks advice, assistance, or consensus when it comes time to create. He just spills that seed. Frequently, a single notable feat or extraordinary accomplishment will catapult the Rohini native into stardom, just as the sole act of creation made Prajapati the most talked about devata in the Brahmanas. Indeed, under favorable chart conditions, all things can grow and prosper for the native born in Rohini. Rohini's fertility extends to other areas as well. Having the stellar configuration of a wain, an ox cart, this nakshatra is particularly auspicious for agricultural fruitfulness. The Rohini native exhibits a keen knack for gardening and cultivation of plants. He or she may be predisposed to professions in agriscience, permaculture, horticulture, agriculture, and so on. The hallmark of the Rohini narrative is an appreciation for nature and familiarity with her cycles and rhythms. Prajapati is famous not only for manifesting earthly vegetation, but as well for having created herded animals like horses, goats, and cows. This characteristic instills in the native a fondness for domesticated or farm animals. However, Prajapati's greatest faculty is creative skillfulness. Remember, the other name for Prajapati given in the Rig Veda is Daksha. And Daksha means skillfulness, expertise is really the word. Oh, I've got to stretch for a moment. Oh, that felt really good. This is likely expressed by the Rohini native through a multitude of avenues, depending upon the overall inclinations of the birth chart. This can give skills in visual arts, such as drawing, painting, handcrafts, and ceramics. It can give rise to skills in performing and fine arts, such as dance, song, theater, and drama, or in related fields of songwriting, stage crafting, costume design, and so on. Any and all forms of creative expression requiring physical agility and ingenious intellect fall under Rohini. It's cool because we can even see transits. We can see eclipses happening in Rohini. We can see new moons and full moons. Any important planet transiting Rohini will bring out these characteristics for that time. Now, several notable performers have Rohini prominent in their birth charts. One such individual is Leontine Price, who has the moon in Rohini. This person is an opera singer who achieved worldwide superstardom. Now, in the actress category is Greta Garbo, who has Jupiter in Rohini. Possessing great physical beauty, another hallmark feature of Rohini, Garbo was one of Hollywood's greatest movie stars. Now, there's Greta Garbo and Martha Graham are described as this author as having the rising sign in Rohini, but we know she's a sidereal author, so I want to give that caveat that she might have the bias of that here. But Jupiter, for these people, was in Rohini. So Martha Graham had Jupiter in Rohini, and this person, Martha Graham, acclaimed the leading exponent of modern dance. And this illustrates Rohini's creative energy expressed through dance. Now, Krishna is said to have Rohini in his nakshatra, in his lagna. You know, you'll have to excuse me, folks, because I've got to get my astronomy right here. It seems to me that even though the lagna would be in a different sign, it would still be in that nakshatra. So we can say that Greta Garbo and Martha Graham have their lagna and Jupiter in Rohini. Excuse me for messing that up. I was just thinking about the fact that we read that Krishna has a Rohini lagna. Lagna meaning the rising sign. So we could see that Krishna, this is what's given in the Bhagavad Mahapurana. Krishna is defined as having Rohini Nakshatra on the rising sign. And Krishna is the godly embodiment of this nakshatra. Like Prajapati's daughter, Krishna has divine physical beauty. Krishna is an expert in song, dance, and music, as well as in the art of lovemaking. Now, although arguably the most materialistic of the 27 nakshatras, Rohini is fully capable of inspiring a spiritual path. Prajapati was especially skilled in the performance of sacrificial worship. In fact, it was Prajapati who taught the other gods the way of the sacrifice. Thus, an appreciation and adeptness for spiritual knowledge and sacerdotal rituals may flourish under this nakshatra. Still, life for the Rohini native is not always all that it's cracked up to be, especially when it comes to familial relationships. One can imagine the reality show The First Cosmic Family, starring Puranic duo Brahma and son Daksha as figureheads for the most dysfunctional family in the history of the gods. Their dysfunction is understandable, since no previous domestic role model existed. If Rohini is unafflicted, then novel or unique family dynamics are substituted for dysfunctional. For examples of this include, yeah, I can see what this is saying here. Well, I'm going to say this, and I think what this is saying here is that if Rohini is unafflicted, then we might find novel or unique family dynamics. Okay, I am reading this correctly. So the author is not necessarily saying, at all that this is necessarily dysfunctional, but someone with an emphasis of Rohini can experience unique, novel, different from from typical sexual procreation in terms of the roots of your family. Such as, for example, she gives the example of a gay couple who employ a surrogate or an in vitro fertilization to give birth to quadruplets. That is not the typical male husband, female wife coming together and having children. But if Rohini is unafflicted, these kind of things can happen, and the person can still be a person who exists just like everybody else. And especially if Rohini is well placed, then even a strange family dynamic like this can give birth to some beautiful people. Now, although this nakshatra is immensely favorable for progeny, we note that Puranic Brahma, what we read about Brahma in the Puranas, is that he faces many obstacles when it comes to children. We recall Brahma's rage when his mind-born son, Daksha, rejects Brahma's fatherly guidance, and they refuse to procreate. So Brahma has these children, and they refuse to listen to his orders. And this enrages him. We also have the character of Sandhya and her act of defiance when, spurning her father's love, she surrenders her life to the fire. That's one of the stories that we would read in the section of Prajapati. Sandhya is the daughter of Daksha, who gets frustrated because of Daksha and Brahma's weird ways, and she spurns his love and burns herself up in a fire. Familial difficulties extend to the broader family unit, where infighting, jealousy, envy, and deception may be the norm for the family of one who has significant placements in Rohini. On the other hand, kudos is in order for this native's readiness to go to the ends of the earth, to assist family and friends, just as Prajapati forsook his own immortality for the benefit of humanity. So there is an ability in this nakshatra to sacrifice, to make all the ends meet, and to resolve any issues that occur. Imbuing a powerful libido, Rohini may cause difficulty in relationships. This theme is consistent throughout the Vedic and Puranic literature. If gravely afflicted in Rohini, then we might see inappropriate, brash, or reckless sexual behavior. The perpetual need to satiate physical urges, even familial incest, can be part and parcel for this nakshatra. We recall that Brahma distorts his own physicality, i.e., he grows 4 additional heads and, on another occasion, transforms himself into a stag. And he does these things in order to satisfy his lustful nature. So indeed, the Rohini native, when afflicted, is likely to be indulgent when it comes to life's physical pleasures, even transforming themselves, doing things they wouldn't normally do, just to gratify these physical pleasures. now we read that Brahma's love of shenanigans invites public dismay and may bring grave repercussions, including physical injury. Brahma, after all, is pierced by Rudra's arrow and later loses one of his 5 heads due to this behavior of his. Similarly, indiscreet or improper behavior by the Rohini native is unlikely to escape the notice of others and may result in injury to the native. All sorts of perversions of all sorts can happen through this nakshatra. This nakshatra is a good example of why we need to practice forgiveness, but still apply just judgment to people who do things of a sexually perverted nature. We don't need to completely drop a person off the face of the earth or, not forgive them, not allow them to have the space of forgiveness. But we do need to give justice for someone who's, for example, who does some kind of like incestuous, like a peeping Tom that looks through the window at people and wants to masturbate while watching people do their regular things, or someone who's like a pedophile, or these kinds of people who do these sexually perverse behaviors. We need to set an example so that such people are not allowed to continue such behavior. But, ideally, we want to, through stories like this, we can understand and sympathize why these characters come through with these kind of natures. And, at least we can have compassion for them while still deliberating what needs to be deliberated in terms of judgment towards things that they've done or that they do. It's the Vedic world encapsulates all possible things that could ever possibly happen, even weird, shadowy stuff like what we're reading right now. Better to talk about it and be aware of these things than to not talk about it and for it to be a shadow. I think that's what I'm picking up from today's discussion. So ultimately, those who engage in this kind of perverse sexual things and physical gratification at the expense of others will probably get some kind of just desserts for those things that they're doing if there is afflictions to Rohini. Now, finally, mention should be made of Brahma's own self-appreciation. Creating the universe is more than just an admirable, but Brahma-centric attitude does bring trouble. Rarely in the Puranas does Prajapati accept any devata as his equal, even co-triad partners Shiva and Vishnu. His elitist attitude results in his own demise. So hence, under unfavorable chart conditions, the larger-than-life Rohini ego may cause problems for the native as well. And this is something that the character of Rohini needs to take care of in going about what they do with themselves and with their lives. So, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, this has been our reading today on the nakshatra Rohini and on the character of Prajapati, which is Rohini's residing deity, as Brahma, the progenitive creator of it all. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you guys have been having a great time hanging out with me while I move through and talk about all this fun nakshatra stuff. I do plan on going through all the nakshatras. I think I'm going to cut these videos down so that it's only the stuff by Vic and Ernst that's available on this video. And then later on, I'm going to have a separate video for what's given in the nakshatras, because it's very long and it's very involved. It's mostly for people who are into Vedic literature. So for those who have been hanging out with me for this, thank you so much. I love you all. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, H. Thank you, Irene Mack. And thank you, Susie Underwood, for all hanging out with me and being a part of this podcast today. I'm so glad Susie says that she's been enjoying the Vedic knowledge, and I'm so glad to hear that. There's so much there. And this book that I got, I'm very happy to be reading it to you all because there's so much there. And there's more to come, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Dustin Cormier. This is How to Rock Astrology. Stay tuned. I love doing this stuff. I love moving through this knowledge. So you can expect that instead of me reading it by myself, I would rather hang out with you guys and do it and get two birds stoned at once. At the same time, it's a Canadian phrase. At the same time that I get to read what is inside this book, I get to share it with you all. And I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Stay tuned next week. We're going to be going through more. We're either going to go through more nakshatra stuff, or I might do something else. So stay tuned with what we got going on next week, every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eventually, we're going to be doing them on Thursdays. I'll be letting you guys know when that goes on. Have an excellent Sunday. Thanks to everybody for hanging out and watching with me. Many blessings to all. Sat Nam. Namaste. Thanks for watching. Take care, folks. I hope you enjoy.